Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello everyone and Namaste. Welcome to my NPTEL course on interior design, and today we are going to see lecture number 6, and it talks about principles and elements of interior design. We'll discuss these with the help of some examples, and we will also try to understand what is composition and why it is important when we talk about interior design or interior architecture, as I have been talking about since the beginning. So, there are principles of interior design, elements of interior design, composition, and we'll also see some references. And when we talk about principles of interior design, they are basically concepts and principles that help us to define and accomplish our projects, right? Interior architecture projects. And there are majorly 7 principles that come very handy when we design interior spaces. So, these are balance, unity, rhythm, emphasis, scale and proportion, contrast, and also the amount of detailing. So I always believe in, God is in the details, and details help achieve a certain vocabulary when we design spaces and projects. So we start with understanding the balance, which could be said as the art of equilibrium. And, it refers to symmetrical and geometric use of space, and which accounts for one of the most essential factors in designing any interior space. And it involves, an understanding of stability. There are 3 kinds of balances, primarily speaking. So, symmetrical, asymmetrical, and this one, which is very interesting, is radial. So, when we talk about the symmetrical balance, it creates mirror images in a space. And this results in, bilaterally symmetric room or a space. It could be any space. And when we talk about asymmetrical balance, it does not focus on geometric entities, but there is a balance in terms of the weight of the objects, which may be identical in shape, size, or dimensions. And when we talk about radial balance, it revolves around central element, which sorts of acts as a focal point in the space. So these are some of the images trying to explain symmetrical balance, which is sort of, mirror image along this axis, and asymmetrical balance, and this is sort of a radial balance where there's a central focal item and then radiating attention in the space. Then of course there is also unity, which is very important principle, and it emphasizes on coherence in diversity. So we may be using diverse elements or diverse objects, but we could still achieve a coherent space by, achieving the unity in the space. So it is an essential aspect of interior design so that, a harmonious and cohesive space could be designed. And it is possible to achieve unity using complementary colors, certain shapes, which are same or similar, and patterns or specific elements. They all, then finally tie into a common theme, and therefore it is possible to achieve unity within diversity. And it can be achieved on a larger scale. Doesn't have to restrict to only a small space or one particular room. It could, free flow in the entire project throughout the project. And that could be done by finding a style or a theme which, one could adhere to. Then there is rhythm, and it's sort of a visual cadence, and it gives a very interesting vocabulary to projects. So rhythm, it can be implemented in a space in a variety of ways, and we could achieve it through repetition, transition, progression, or even contrast. And by repeating similar shapes, patterns, or textures. And it could be also done at a micro level within each room, or it could be done throughout the project. depends on what the design is. Then there is emphasis, which is basically crafting focal points within interior spaces or the overall project. And it involves drawing attention to a certain aspect of the room or space. And it could be done by using an accent such as color or through a pattern or a texture. And there could also be a combination or permutation of these. And it works very well in combination with radial balance, because both of these try to focus on a certain central point or a focal area. Then color is also a very, very interesting tool to achieve emphasis. And painting a feature wall in a very bold color or bringing accents of vibrant colors to a certain area, that could transform a space. So these kinds of tools can be used for creating emphasis, and color becomes a very important medium to do that. Emphasis highlights and draws attention to a specific area of the room or space, and it creates visual impact. And there are 5 ways to emphasize focal points within interior spaces. These could be furniture, accents, lighting, color that we were just talking about, texture, shape, and pattern. So when we try to create emphasis through furniture, we could use a statement piece of furniture, and it could serve as a focal point in its own right. Furniture placement can also be used to influence a focal point, like how we are placing the furniture, in what orientation and with what detailing. So placing sofas, chairs, and tables around a fireplace, for example, that could create emphasis. It could, encourage people to gather around, and it could draw traffic to this space. Also, furniture in contrasting colors and textures will leave an impact on the viewer, and it's a very interesting scheme to create emphasis like that. Distinct forms can also foster emphasis, such as highlighting a sculpture within a space of clean lines. That would also create an emphasis. Now, if we talk about emphasis through accents, one could use accents to enhance the visual appeal and to elevate the overall feel of the space. It could include window furnishings, moldings, some artworks, even furniture pieces like bookshelves. And statement furniture pieces can also be emphasized by accents such as cushions, etc. Like we see an example over here. So these are the sources for the images, basically, wherever we have tried to draw references from. It's also possible to achieve emphasis through lighting, and that's in any case a very important aspect of interior design projects or interior architecture projects, the lighting design itself. So strategically placed lighting, is a powerful way to create emphasis. The eye is drawn to areas of contrast naturally, where there is, light meeting darkness. And lighting can be used to illuminate design features, for example, the alcoves or, archways. So this is sort of an alcove lighting. So, and it's possible to accentuate or emphasize or highlight it through lighting design, this kind of a space or area or ceiling. Now, some light fixtures, for example, chandeliers or these kinds of pendant lights, suspended or hanging pendant lights, whether they are hovering over a dining table or any other kind of space, depending on the function and the typology of the project, they could very well create emphasis and focal points. And it's also possible to achieve emphasis through colors, like we have been talking about. And, color in any case is a very important aspect or element of interior design. And it is also one of the easiest ways to emphasize a focal point by using a very carefully, designed color palette. Accent walls, again, for example, they emphasize through color, and also it's very subtle without committing to the full overhaul of a space. Certain accent walls, like just this one wall over here, that could be an interesting way to emphasize. And even with neutral shades, a point of contrast can become the focal point, like a gray against a warm white. So even that kind of emphasis is possible through colors. And a more playful effect with a splash of bright color could also be achieved within a space. And this especially works well with a monochrome scheme such as this. So this gets highlighted over here, like a playful bright color. And over here, this is also a very, very vibrant color scheme that we see over here. Then we can achieve emphasis through textures, shapes, and patterns. And the textures and patterns, they could energize a space. And for example, like exposed brickwork or a vibrant patterned wallpaper, or an intricately carved furniture, these all can become anchor points to the eye, and they can become focal points within the space. Also, shapes and patterns can introduce a contrast, and they will also emphasize the focal point, such as a textured rug on a bare floor that will also stand out. And an interior plant, for example, fern, can also add textures within a space. So, plants like these. Lines can be used to determine the flow of a space. So, lines, make a very, very important element of interior design. So, if we talk about horizontal lines being used in the design, vertical lines can break the pattern, and they can break the monotony which the horizontal lines are creating, and then hence the vertical lines and a certain pattern or a geometry which is achieved through these different lines could stand out within a space, and they could also create attention and emphasis. Now let's talk about scale and proportion, which is to do with the balancing of the sizes. And it's very, very important for interior architects, interior designers, all kinds of designers, to understand scale and proportion. So, scale and proportion of the objects is largely determined by the size of the space, and they go hand in hand. There is an interrelationship between these two. So, it's important to take into account size of the room, height of the ceilings, and accordingly match furniture and decorations which go with the entire fit out. So, a room with higher ceiling will benefit from taller furniture and focal points such as bookshelves, whereas these could be very overwhelming if we use a smaller room because it will get overcrowded. Scale and proportion create visually interesting spaces, and art pieces on the wall, potted plants, shelving, these can also add dimensions and aid in cultivating a very visually stimulating environment. Now let's talk about contrast, and it helps in amplifying visual interest within a space. It is about combining visually juxtaposing objects, and it creates a very striking effect by virtue of this contrast, like we see over here, like a stark contrast between these two. This surface and furniture, also the color. So the material palette as well as the color, this sort of brings the contrast. Again, color is an easy method or a way, to implement some contrast in a space. Little contrast is effective. Too much can be very, very overwhelming and chaotic, but it sort of depends on what the design is. But little contrast is always way more effective. Selecting a few areas to implement contrast, it keeps a room visually interesting. It gives some kind of a definition to that space. Talking about details, now details could really come handy in personalizing the space, making it a place, particularizing it for the user, creating nice sensory experiences and visual stimuli within that project. So, focusing on small details can create an environment which is very unique. And details could be, of any kind: patterns, furnishing details, accessories, even hardware like door handles, etc. throughout the project. They could be points of interest as well as create a very nice design vocabulary within the space. So, these intricate details can really enhance the space, and these details could be, also organized or coordinated in a certain manner. They would help achieve configuration within spaces, and through the help of material palette and particular specifications, certain complex details are possible to be achieved. Now, other than these basic principles, we could also talk about alignment, repetition, movement, also the white space or the spaces in between that we see. So, these principles focus, on unifying a theme, combining motives to create a pattern, identifying the need to remove unnecessary or extra elements. So these are also like important tools in the kit that the designer uses for creating very, very interesting interior spaces. Now, contemporary design is focused more on minimizing the use of extra elements, and it's sort of becoming very, very minimal, very functional. Although there is no sacrosanct rule, and to each one their own and what the clientele want, but yes, it is more inclined towards minimal usage of elements as per the vogue that is going on. And the contemporary designs are also characterized by monochromatic undertones, very dynamic lines, also natural settings. So, since we are talking about details and how they help elevate the interior architecture project, they have a lot of attributes that could really, support the project and make it stand out. So, details could help us in achieving these following attributes and actually much more beyond this. So, expressiveness, functionality, beauty, or aesthetic, a certain style, whether it's to recreate a period style or to do something with a Victorian style or contemporary design. What is the utilitarian aspect within the design? Even the details can bring out that. The economy, comfort within a project, and of course, the safety measure. That's also very important. We could add on a lot of things over here. For example, sustainability, since we are talking about SDGs quite a lot throughout the module, and circularity, etc. So the details can help us achieve these attributes as well. Now, what are the elements of interior design? That's also very important to understand to put a project together. So these are basic elements. They are used to produce an aesthetically relevant, creative, pleasing, functional project. We again have 7 basic elements which could be very, very useful for creating interior design projects, interior architecture projects. And they are space, line, form, light, color, texture, pattern. All of these are very, very important. Let's talk a bit about space. We already have discussions on space versus place, elements of space making. What does space mean to users and designers? We have been constantly talking about it throughout different lectures. So it could be, referred to as a framework for all interior design basics. Project begins with assessment of the space or room in which one shall create, design, or remodel. And it's very, very crucial to understand positive space and negative space. So when space is filled with design elements, it is called a positive space. And when space in a room is intentionally left empty, it is called a negative space. This is like a very basic and simple or a loosely put definition. So, to understand the interplay of positive and negative space. And this kind of balance between the positive and negative space is what the designer focuses upon or aspires to achieve. Let's talk about line. So, line is another very, very important element within the interior design fraternity and used for the projects. And it could be horizontal, vertical, dynamic, and it helps our eye achieve a certain movement. It focuses the eye on these kinds of, attributes like horizontality, verticality, dynamism, etc. So horizontal lines, they are created in, positive spaces through furniture, cabinets, counters, wall hangings, even, lighting decor. And vertical lines are built into a negative space through, windows, doors, walls, and flooring. So we always take cues and references and, through these elements of space making and then try to create this kind of a vertical expanse or a horizontal expanse, etc., within a space. Now, lines define the way a space flows. It gives the eye a sense of where to move and, what could be the movement of eye be like. Dynamic lines like diagonal and curved lines, they create a lot of interest. They draw attention to specific areas within the space or specific detailing that one, may have created to draw attention towards. And combination of different lines could create, stability, balance, sense of direction, etc. Lots of different characteristics within a space. Talking about form, yeah, form is of course very, very important. The overall sort of cognizance and sense of what we are looking at. And the key to achieving a form is characterized by creating a natural balance and shape and actually not differentiating the space through strong and sharp geometries. Light, again, light, we have had a lot of discussion. We will talk about it throughout the course, whether it's green interiors or, surface finishes. We will be talking about the role of light quite prominently actually. So natural and artificial light, they could be used in a combination. They are important elements of any interior design project. And the interplay between these two, the man-made and organic lighting, it defines also the mood within a space. And if we talk about organic light, it creates, perception within a space. And artificial lighting can create intimacy, mood, and it can also give perception of smaller spaces, and totally depends on the design aspects. So we see over here the natural light or daylight, which is facilitated through these large openings, and the site is oriented in such a way that it facilitates the daylight. This is task lighting and accent lighting and mood lighting. There is a discussion on these where we talk about lighting design. Color is sort of an inevitable element when we talk about interior architecture industry and interior design projects. Very fundamental and crucial element. And it can give a lot of definition to a space, it can unify a space, it could provide an emphasis, it could be a part of detailing, it could be used in a lot of customized ways. And particularly when we talk about creating emphasis through colors, this 60-30-10 color rule is very handy, and it is followed technically in the sense that 60% is the main color, which is usually neutral. 30% would be the secondary color in the color palette, and it provides contrast and also supports the main color. And the remaining 10% over here is the accent color, which is usually very bright and it draws the attention towards it. So here if we see, this 60% is the main color, this one over here is the 30% in the 60-30-10 rule, and this one over here is the 10% accent color. And the combination of this, kind of creates this very interesting space. And overall sort of balance is achieved while sort of putting this all together in a place. Talking about texture. So texture is again a very important aspect of interior design projects and spaces which are, inhabited by the users. And it is experienced visually and viscerally. And it's, it can be felt, it can be very tactile, that can be touched. And it can tell lots of stories about a space, create spaces with history and permanence. So it's a very important element and very important aspect of design. And it gives spaces a very timeless appeal sometimes, depending on what you are trying to create. And it's important to understand visual textures and actual textures. So visual textures, for example, like marble, they could create illusion of physical textures. And actual textures, let's say like cactus and velvet, they are very palpable, they can be felt, they can be touched. So textures are quite interesting. And then moving on to pattern now. So, pattern is also a very interesting element, and pattern could be achieved by combining certain motifs or, certain kinds of diverse elements, let's say by repeating shapes or, by introducing certain theme which binds these shapes together or the motifs together. And they could be also used for creating a certain focal point and emphasis. Also sometimes rhythm, depending on what and where you have designed it. So patterns are quite eye-catching, and they can be particularly pronounced in fabric, wallpaper, tiling, carpeting, etc. And the principles of interior design are guidelines that are used to create visually appealing spaces, and the elements that we just saw, they are actually what are used to adhere to these principles. For example, when focusing on the principle of contrast, primarily we would be using the elements of light and color. So this interrelationship and combination and permutation of which element, which principle, how does it come handy technically speaking, sometimes just for aesthetic but sometimes also in terms of the science behind how to enhance the perception within a space. All of these need to be really understood, experienced, learned through practice. So they will all come very handy for interior design projects. So these elements and principles, when they are put together, they work wonders for interior design projects. Now there's golden ratio within interior design, and it's quite interesting and sort of important to understand how this ratio helps in interior design projects. I have put just the overview and very important basic rules because this itself could be a very crucial and large discussion. So golden ratio actually can be a very reliable tool for achieving balance. And here if we see, there is this ratio that has been achieved, which is the golden ratio, how proportionately and these elements are put together to achieve this overall sort of balance. So using the golden ratio allows the design to feel organic and pleasing to the eye, of course, while keeping in mind the overall balance and proportion. The golden ratio helps achieve a balanced room layout. And for practical application, the ratio that could be like very, very useful could be 60 to 40, or it is also known as 60-30-10 rule, which means 60% of the space will have furniture and 40% could be like clear. So let's say you were to put furniture within a space, and if we could use the 60-40 ratio or 60-30-10 rule and try to achieve this 60% 40% balance, the overall layout would be very, very functional, effective, also very balanced. Golden ratio can guide the furniture selection also, because we have a proportional framework in place, and it also aligns with the principles of balance and visual harmony. And it does allow the designers to take informed decisions, make choices about size, placement and coordination of furniture within a space as per this framework, which is sort of a thumb rule. Applying the golden ratio while accessorizing the project can also be very, very helpful, and we could get very thoughtfully curated spaces. And the pieces, they could be selected on the basis of two-thirds the size of the wall to give a visual balance. So for gallery walls, let's say, select pieces that are proportionate to one another and leave the 60% of the wall blank to provide an overall balance. So that's again a very handy rule. And these are some applications of golden ratio, here in staircase, media console over here. This design again we see over here. This is the golden ratio. Here we see the golden ratio over here. Also here in this traditional house and these light fixtures. So this ratio can be seen on, varied objects in different projects at different scales. Understanding composition. Composition is very, very important to, create interesting, appealing projects. So a visual arrangement in which separate elements come together to form a whole is, how composition could be understood as. And, the world of interior design has its laws, the laws of composition. And if we try to violate those laws, it could create a lack of balance and harmony. And all the objects in the room, they must interact with each other, and they could interact through different interrelationships to create an overall geometry, concept and composition. There could be chaos and order within a composition. There could be chaos, order, order in chaos. These are all different ways of looking at composition. So a well thought out interior design never looks like a random set of objects. Although while I'm speaking it, I could also say that it could be random. And within randomness, a certain order could be created. It depends on the design sensibilities and the kind of project that one is looking at. Spaces full of details or mixed styles or different periods, they can also be treated through composition. And we can try not to create them in a chaotic manner, but having a certain composition, even though these distinct elements are put together. Then when we talk about composition, there is also an important aspect of room dominance and center. So within an interior composition, is there something dominant that has been designed? There is something that the eye looks, the first thing when we enter in that space. So it's possible to do that, and it could be done either through a statement object or centerpiece or color, or could be highlighted through a shape or scale, etc. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in the center of the space. It could be anywhere. And these are some examples, the common centric elements like a fireplace, TV area, carpet, etc. It's also very, very useful to understand symmetry and asymmetry while we are talking about composition. And also it can be depending on the individual or the clientele, whether symmetry is preferred or asymmetry is preferred. And both are actually quite interesting. Personally, going by my own vocabulary, I like a lot of asymmetry, but again, trying to have an asymmetrical balance within the space. So we can create all of these. Symmetry is fairly logical and organized, while asymmetry is quite dynamic and interesting. So one could pick and choose. Then also, what is the relationship between or amongst the different objects that are put together in a space? Because, we as humans and as part of our behavior, we perceive everything holistically. So, how are we looking at different objects or elements or pieces put together in the sense that what is the interrelationship between them? So, whenever there is a harmonious interior scheme, it does make the user quite comfortable and relatable in that sense. And it has to be very, very interesting in the way that the relationship between the objects or the elements is put together. For example, here, like rounded back of the sofa, it can echo with the shape of this table. So we can create these kinds of inter relationships even though there are diverse objects of different nature. Contrasts and accents are, of course, another important factors which impact composition greatly. So objects in an interior space, they can be friends not only due to a relationship but also with the help of contrast. It is possible. And contrasting colors are quite used in contemporary designs to create very, very expressive, designs or pieces. And the main thing is that one doesn't do like, too much of any particular element. So too much of contrast is also not good. So has to be understood in a very subtle manner. Now we'll see some references after this discussion on elements and principles of design. I've put together some of the websites. Image sources are always there on the slides themselves, plus more references for, broader and in-depth understanding. This will be our next lecture and we will focus primarily on space making elements. I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for your time.